It's two-thirds of Canadians, 67%, want to have whoever may form the next government in Canada have action on climate change be a priority. 65% folks in Canada agree that we should invest in renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. Really great to see it really clearly. 65% support renewables over fossil fuel development. Even when we talk about other contexts, even if we ask questions that put other things on top, like, do you want to see Canada continue to support climate even if the United States does not? Even if the United States does something crazy like pull out of the Paris Accords or otherwise rip up their climate commitments, Canadians still think that it's really important for Canada to do our part when it comes to climate action. Canadians are one of the populations around the world that is already beginning to see the impacts of climate change and the tens of billions of dollars of damage, everything from wildfires to floods in atmospheric rivers to heat domes and hurricanes. Canadians are really familiar with what it looks like to be impacted by climate.
We did an exhibition in Ottawa and in New York City actually last year with climate survivors in Canada, and
Right.
so it seems that people have not forgotten.
The mess we find ourselves in today is a very immediate problem. We need solutions that are going to be here right now to begin addressing it and are going to continue to be here in decades to come. Pipelines are not that kind of solution. They're going to take 10, 15 years to build. Tens of billions of dollars, probably more than we think now. They end up costing more than we think. And they're for a product that the International Energy Agency and others say that is going to have less and less demand as the years go on. The latest estimates are before 2030, within the next 5 years, we're going to see the demand for oil peak. So having an oil pipeline to Tidewater, even before we reach peak oil, is just craziness.
I think a lot of people don't get that peak equals decline immediately afterwards.
What's exciting to me and what's exciting to see is the support in this polling is the solution side to this are the renewables and clean energy solutions that are ready for prime time and have a lot of benefits too. Going toward an electricity grid that's 100% clean in Canada. We're talking on the order of 1.5 million jobs between now and 2050. When we talk about the sort of affordability and cost benefits, the great news is that renewables are now the cheapest form of electricity in history, and in fact, that's been true for more than 3 years already.
Welcome to another episode of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. I'm Connor Curtis, Head of Communications at Sierra Club Canada, and today I'm going to be talking with Stephen Thomas of the David Suzuki Foundation about some recent polling via Leger about Canadians' stances on environmental action. This polling was done in March of 2025, so very recently, showing that 65% of Canadians prefer to prioritize renewable energy development instead of oil and gas development. We're going to be talking about that and about how one of the major obstacles we have to renewables is the policy certainty around them, creating a regulatory environment and an environment that's going to be supportive of renewables to really encourage investment that could lead to a lot of jobs in Canada. In fact, one of the other obstacles / benefits of renewable energy that we're going to talk about is how it actually creates a demand for so many jobs we might have trouble filling all of those jobs. So please tune in. We're going to be chatting more about that. Before we begin, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you get your latest episodes from us. So thanks for joining me, Stephen. For those tuning in for the first time, who are you and what do you do?
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me for this conversation. My name is Stephen Thomas. I'm the Clean Energy Manager with the David Suzuki Foundation. I use he, him, and I'm here on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka in Montreal. And my work, for the most part, is on climate and energy issues. My day-to-day is typically on things like renewables and clean electricity, but I work a lot across the different issues that we work on when it comes to climate and nature. And I'm excited to talk about some of this polling and some of the different political topics that are hot right now.
So you did some polling via Leger, and that found that 62% of Canadians want us to keep our climate commitments, that 65% of Canadians prefer renewable energy development instead of oil and gas development, and that 67% of Canadians want the next government to prioritize nature and climate as protection issues. Kind of some interesting stats there. Can you tell us a bit more about the polling, what you found, and what this says?
Yeah, and the results for us were really one consistent with what Canadians have been saying for a long time about their priorities when it comes to climate change and having a government take action on climate change. So it's consistent with that, but it's really important to have, we think, a more recent temperature check on that support for climate. There is a lot happening right now when it comes to politics and everything that Canadians are facing. Poly-crisis, multiple crises at once when it comes to affordability, housing, certainly the climate crisis, and now all of these new threats from a government in the United States when it comes to annexing Canada, or at the very least, setting our economy into some kind of turmoil with these threats or realities of tariffs. So there's a lot happening. And I think for us, it was really encouraging to go out to market and ask these questions and have the answer come back that Canadians still really do see this as a priority. As you said off the top, it's two-thirds of Canadians, 67%, want to have whoever may form the next government in Canada have action on climate change be a priority. Down in the weeds of some of the polling that we've done here too, is that even when we talk about other contexts, even if we ask questions that put other things on top, like, do you want to see Canada continue to support climate, even if the United States does not? Even if the United States does something crazy like pull out of the Paris Accords or otherwise rip up their climate commitments, Canadians still think that it's really important for Canada to do our part when it comes to climate action. There's more to say on renewables, which I think we'll get into in a minute, but at a high level, I think we're seeing this because Canadians are one of the populations around the world that is already beginning to see the impacts of climate change and the tens of billions of dollars of damage, not only to our health and our life and livelihoods. It's very, very expensive in Canada to continue to see these climate impacts. So everything from wildfires to floods and atmospheric rivers to heat domes and hurricanes, Canadians are really familiar with what it looks like to be impacted by climate, and every forecast says that as we continue to burn fossil fuels, these impacts will get worse. So I think this is going to be something that is going to have to be a priority in Canada, no matter who forms government and no matter what's happening in terms of the kind of politics of the day.
Yeah, and I was going to say actually with the polling that you saw, and that's why it stood out to me because again, wasn't sure what this was going to look like. This polling that you just did is from March 2025, so it's really recent to the recording of this podcast at least. And it matched or was very similar to polling that had been done in December 2024. Polling around, for instance, the emissions cap that was done by Abacus data, and then Abacus, I believe, as well, did some polling for environmental defense, found very similar kind of findings and numbers on climate action. So it seems like that stayed consistent. A lot has changed, as you mentioned, since December 2024. A lot has changed, in fact,
Oh yeah.
over these past few months, but it has stayed consistent that people seem to want climate action. And, we did an exhibition in Ottawa and in New York City actually last year with climate survivors in Canada, and
Right.
so it seems that people have not forgotten that. And in some ways, as you say, I'm not surprised because once you start to hear these stories, I mean, for me personally, those stories changed a lot of my personal connection to the issue, even though I already felt some personal connection. It's like it seems to supercharge it to the point at which you're very connected to that. So as that continues to happen, I do feel, yeah, that seems in line with what I've been seeing.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we were out in market with these questions, I think it was March 7th to 10th, very recently, is
Hmm.
really important for the context of this federal election. It means that this is not a niche issue for just a few parties or just for it to land somewhere on the political spectrum. 67% is most Canadians. So every party must take this seriously. It's not good strategy. It's not good politics for any party to ignore the realities of climate change and to walk back our action in terms of mitigating climate change and building out supports for folks to deal with the disasters that are coming our way.
And so it would seem to contradict because I've seen a lot of polling from largely promoted by Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, largely promoted by other groups, saying, Canadians are, I think the most recent thing was something like 80, 90% in favor of pipelines across the country. I did look at the wording of some of that polling and I found it a little bit problematic because it seemed to kind of muddy what exactly it was people were agreeing to. But I'm curious, how do you find how do you explain the contrast maybe between that polling that seems to say people believe in pipelines now versus what you found in your polling?
I think there is a lot that some more disingenuous actors are able to do in terms of the phrasing of their questions to make something appear like it has more support or less. I'm not sure at all if that's what happened with some of the polling you're talking about with pipelines in Canada. When it comes to the politics and the kind of PR and airwave battle on fossil fuels and renewables in Canada, it's a lot of the same tactics, unfortunately, that we've seen for many years. You mentioned the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, or CAP, Pathways Alliance, the largest group of producers from the tar sands, is another. There are many different individual companies and industry associations that spend millions and tens of millions on messaging, on government relations and lobbying federal officials and this kind of message testing to kind of find exactly what works. We, of course, don't have those kind of resources. That's not the kind of work that we're doing. What we depend on is sort of people power and the broader piece of public opinion to kind of support our work. When it comes to the pipeline issue, I think it's so disappointing to have bad faith actors like these fossil fuel companies jump on this crisis as an opportunity for them to make a buck. These are companies that have record profits rather of any company in the history of the world. In Canada, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars of profit a year as Canadians are dealing with an affordability crisis. As Canadians are looking down the barrel of another crisis, they're trying to jump on this opportunity to make another buck off of our backs. And it's gross. These projects that they're talking about reviving are pipelines that have already been rejected on environmental grounds, have already been rejected by communities that do not give consent for these pipelines to cross their communities, from Indigenous communities who do not give consent for these pipelines to cross their territories. And in many cases, they're just bad business. So the fact that a pipeline might be a good idea or somehow a solution for the mess we find ourselves in today is just wrong. The mess we find ourselves in today is a very immediate problem. We need solutions that are going to be here right now to begin addressing it and are going to continue to be here in decades to come. Pipelines are not that kind of solution. They're going to take 10, 15 years to build, tens of billions of dollars, probably more than we think now. They end up costing more than we think. And they're for a product that the International Energy Agency and others say that is going to have less and less demand as the years go on. Peak oil is something that we've been chasing for a long time, but the latest estimates are before 2030, within the next 5 years, we're going to see the demand for oil peak. So having an oil pipeline to Tidewater, even before we reach peak oil, is just craziness. I could go on, and I think I'd rather talk about the flip side of that because what's exciting to me and what's exciting to see is the support in this polling is the solution side to this, are the renewables and clean energy solutions that are ready for prime time and have a lot of benefits too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't get that peak equals decline immediately afterwards, right? Like you're
Right.
looking at declining, and again, as you say, products. But yeah, it is great to see the excitement. Just to comment on some of the other polling, I believe one piece of polling said something like the kind of pro oil and gas polling said something like, "Do you support a Canadian energy corridor, including oil and gas?" Right? So if you say yes, maybe you meant to say yes to the whole thing, but that got shifted in there as well, right? So I think that's more what I'm thinking. But you're right, the excitement there is really key, and so that does tie into my next question. What role do you think renewables are going to play in Canada's future?
A big role, and I'm excited to talk about it here. This is typically what my work touches at the David Suzuki Foundation, and there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the benefits of clean electricity. And that too was so good to see in this polling. The number there is 65% folks in Canada agree that we should invest in renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. We see different numbers when we do polling like this sometimes where we say, do you like renewables? Yes or no? Do you like fossil fuels? Yes or no? But when we have that kind of juxtaposition or saying either or, it's usually more muddled support. But here it's really great to see really clearly 65% support renewables over fossil fuel development. And the benefits are huge when it comes to jobs. Is work that we do when we're going toward an electricity grid that's 100% clean in Canada. We're talking on the order of 1.5 million jobs between now and 2050. When we talk about the sort of affordability and cost benefits, the great news is that renewables are now the cheapest form of electricity in history. And in fact, that's been true for more than 3 years already. So if we have an electricity system that uses more of the cheapest possible electricity, electricity is going to cost less. So the more wind and solar we build, the cheaper our electricity will become. Even if and as we have to do things like upgrade our grid, we talk about new transmission connections between provinces or things like energy storage to make sure that the electricity system is secure and reliable. And when we flip the switch, we know electricity will be there for us. Even with those things in mind, it's still an overall cheaper electricity system when it's clean than when it's the system we have today, which uses a lot of fossil fuels, depending on what province you live in. And that's the case because fossil fuels are a very volatile global market. The price goes up and down. It's the
Mhm.
largest single contributor to the inflation that we've seen over the last few years. And as we move off of that volatile market pricing and toward a much more stable, lower price for things like renewables, costs go down. And that's huge right now when we're in the middle of an affordability crisis and when we're trying to build an economy that is more secure in the face of American tariffs and that is here to stay when it comes to changing climates and changing kind of global economies over the next few decades. We're talking about wind and solar, and it's important to remind folks that that's also local. You don't have to buy wind or solar, like the wind that blows or the sun that shines, from anyone else. It's not a market. Once they're here and once they're built, they're here to stay. And it's people who live and work in Canada who build and maintain them and see those benefits. And when it comes to health too, it's something that we often go over. But 42 Canadians die every single day in Canada from premature and preventable causes because of air pollution that is due to the burning of fossil fuels, more than 15,000 Canadians a year. We're talking about billions of dollars of health system impacts from breathing dirty air or other health impacts from fossil fuels. And this too is what we're going to move away from as we move to an overall energy system that uses less fossil fuels and uses more renewables, which just don't have that kind of impact.
Well, and I was going to say, we had some interesting conversations. Our sister organization is, of course, the U.S. Sierra Club, right? We're separate, but we chat to each other. And they actually
Sure.
came up to Montreal when all of this stuff with the United States started, because in part because they just wanted to hear what we had to say. And it was interesting to hear them talk about the sort of green and the future of this now in jeopardy, but the green revolution in the States and the benefit it was bringing to certain areas where you had places where manufacturing had actually shut down, right? Like that was it, right? The factory that everybody worked at was gone. And then actually because of the renewable boom, that factory was reopened as like a solar panel factory or a new factory was built in its place. And you had suddenly manufacturing jobs coming back. And so the sort of the exciting aspect of that was if we start to do something similar in Canada, if we do go in the green direction rather than the oil and gas direction. I mean, oil and gas production is a good piece by the CCPA, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, talk about how even as production has increased in the past in Canada, we've seen jobs not necessarily increase with it, even when the oil and gas industry is doing good. The nice thing about green energy is it seems to create all these localized manufacturing jobs if you do it in a local way and you create that, Canadian supply chain using things like Canadian aluminum and steel, right, in the actual, which are
Yeah.
key elements of renewables. There seems to be like a real future for manufacturing as a result of this.
Yeah, and I mean to be very honest with you, the current state of manufacturing for clean electricity in particular, things like wind turbines and solar panels, is very small in Canada. There's a lot to be desired and a lot of room for improvement. And it's because in Canada, over the last couple of decades, it's been pretty boom and bust, pretty unreliable for how and how many renewable energy projects we built. One province will call for a bunch of new power from renewables, while the next province cancels projects and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that opens up once we actually agree and once we actually start trying to reach renewable electricity targets, to build out a clean electricity grid. That's when the certainty is there for large companies to set up manufacturing capacity here and have even more benefits kind of spin off from that. So that's exciting for me. Something I say a lot is like the reason why we're not getting to 100% clean electricity in Canada is because we're not trying. A huge portion of the utilities in Canada are doing much more work against this sort of goal than toward it. I think that's changing every day, and we've had lots of success in the last couple of years. But that moment where we finally switch and the kind of political and economic momentum is in the direction of actually doing this thing, then I'm really excited for the kind of benefits that come with it.
Yeah, and it does come down to a certain amount of just not shooting ourselves in the foot with and whether that's creating policy certainty,
Yeah.
whether that's actually creating we've had these huge fights, and a lot of it's been about oil and gas ultimately, right? Like it's been about, this sort of continued desire on the part of the oil and gas industry to be the priority for everything. And that's actually hurt the ability to gain create that stability for the thing we really need in the future, which is the renewables. So yeah, I on that note, we're seeing in the US obviously the opposite of that. We're seeing these attacks on renewable energy. I think you've covered this a bit in your answer to the last question, but why should Canada continue to take climate action?
Climate change is here to stay. Climate impacts are here to stay. It's always going to be a good idea to set up an economy, to set up supports for our people in Canada to weather these storms of the climate crisis and to be on the winning side when it comes to the kind of energy that's going to be here to stay as the rest of the world moves away from things like oil, gas, and coal. It's just the right thing to do for so many reasons. Canada's history of being a very highly polluting contributor to global greenhouse gases. But there's just so many reasons to do it that are good for Canadians too. So it's a no-brainer. It's a win-win-win for us, and it's something we're always excited to talk about, even when there's not a federal election happening.
Yeah, totally. And so I guess as a kind of a second to last question, what would you say to folks who are maybe in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland and Labrador, these areas where, I mean, I grew up in Newfoundland and Labrador. It is increasingly not an oil economy anymore, but still a large portion of the economy is oil and gas. Certainly, on the national level, it's like 5%, right? On the provincial level, it can be like 20%, 30%, right, of the GDP. And so what would you say to folks in those provinces who are maybe nervous about the future of oil?
I think that no matter what we do, we have to center communities, center workers, center Indigenous communities and inherent rights that they have when we talk about any sort of energy project. But speaking specifically to folks who are working in the oil and gas sector, it's going to be a very volatile and scary time in this sector
Hmm.
until it ends. And that is regardless of what any prime minister does, regardless of what any premier may try and do, the era of oil and gas is ending. And the era of electricity, and in particular renewables, is what is going to be here to stay. So if we care about people, if we care about workers, we shouldn't lie to them and say that that's not the case and say that for some reason only in Alberta, only in Newfoundland and Labrador, oil and gas will be here until 2100 or forever and ever. It's just not true. I have uncles and a brother-in-law who work in the oil and gas sector. I'm from the East Coast too. It's really common for folks to kind of commute back and forth to the oil patch. I care about them, and I care about them having jobs 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So this is the kind of work that we need to do, is setting a plan that actually considers them. It's called the sort of just transition for workers and communities, and not lying to them. As much as it's something we might want to hear, is that nothing will change. It's just not true. The good news is that we have a huge opportunity and a huge problem with how much new things we need to build when it comes to renewables and clean economy. When it comes to the electricity system, we have to double or even triple the size of the electricity sector to meet this moment of sort of turning off fossil fuels and more so being available for things like electric vehicles and electric public transport, moving away from fossil fuels in our homes and buildings toward things like electric heat pumps. Those are all good things, and they all need much more electricity. So we're going to be doing a lot of building in Canada. And a lot of these sort of skills and trades are really transferable for the energy sector. There are many numbers and studies out there. I mentioned one off the top here. When we talk about just the electricity sector, it's about 1.5 million new jobs being built out for building and maintaining things like wind and solar and new electricity lines. Clean Energy Canada had a great study about a year ago where they kind of mapped out the energy transition. Yes, we're going to actually get to zero emissions in Canada by 2050. It does mean that we're going to be turning down the oil and gas sector and turning up these other sectors. But what does it mean for jobs? And net, on balance, it's 700,000 more jobs, even considering all of the jobs that might be lost in the oil and gas sector in places like Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador. It's just a good move. That doesn't mean it's not scary. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be things that we need to consider where we really have to support folks to kind of make that leap. But there's just no other way to do it, in our view.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say, it's funny, I had somebody else on the show talking about renewable energy, and one of the actual obstacles they identified was literally having the tradespeople, like literally having enough tradespeople for that. And when you put that in the context of somewhere like Newfoundland and Labrador, that's actually like it's a problem, but it's a positive problem, right? Like, it's clear there's going to be the demand, as you're saying, for the electricity. And then it's just a question of how do you build up enough renewables and have enough tradespeople to do that. And maybe also encouraging people to go into the trades. Like it's funny, not that long ago in my own personal career, COVID, I ended up getting laid off from the
Right.
job I initially had. And for a few months there, I was talking to my uncle who works in the trades, and I was like, maybe I should totally switch out of communications here. Like I honestly think we need to change some perceptions that we've had for a long time that assume that you have to go do like the business side or the education side. I mean, that's something I grew up with was like a lot of people have this conception of, oh, well, the trades are the past and we need to, in order to be in the
Right.
future, you need to go do the academic thing. Maybe we need to change that perception as well a bit.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, the trades are usually and always a good bet, but right now when we're talking about the specifics of this energy transition, I couldn't agree more. Like the problem is not that we're not going to have the jobs. The problem is that we're going to have too many jobs and not enough people who are trained to do this work that needs to be done. When we do a little bit of work in coalition with some of the bigger labor unions in Canada through the Green Economy Network, folks like IBEW and steelworkers and Unifor and CLC. And this is what they're talking about is trying to get the federal government to take seriously the scope and scale of training that we need for folks for all these jobs that are coming in the clean economy. We got to take it seriously.
Yeah, totally. Well, how can people find out more?
So always a good way to reach us is on our website, davidsuzuki.org. You'll find my work on energy, our team's work on climate and nature and everything in between, and ways to kind of sign up to learn more, to support our work and all that sort of stuff. We're on all the major social platforms too. We've got TikTok, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And Facebook, we are happy to announce are finally off of the X, what used to be known as Twitter. So you can find us on most places where you are. And we'll be doing a lot during the federal election. We'll be doing a lot after that. There's never a shortage of work on this when it comes to climate justice and energy justice, and not only building out everything that we're talking about on the line here, but also making sure that communities benefit, that Indigenous communities, frontline communities benefit first from this transition because they've been the folks who've suffered first and worst from climate crisis and environmental racism and everything in between. So just a little plug at the end here for some of our upcoming work on community-owned renewables and Indigenous-owned renewables is something that we're really excited about. And if you are too, we're really happy to connect on it.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining me today.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Before we end today, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes from us.